Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this very important discussion around voter engagement here in New York City. My name is Melva Miller. I am the CEO at the Association for a Better New York, and I am so happy you all joined us this afternoon. I'm sure many of you have either been in discussions amongst your peers or have heard others discussing how the 2021 elections in New York City will have the largest impact in reshaping the city's political and social landscape in recent election history, right? We talk about an estimated 500 candidates running for mayor, comptroller, public advocate, 2 district attorney seats, 5 borough presidents, and 2/3 of the city council, whether it's for open seats or seats that incumbents hold. We have an enormous amount of seats up for election in 2021. And within this, we know that New York City has historically had low turnouts in all elections, despite high levels of voter registration here in New York City. And in local elections, voter turnout is even lower, right? According to the New York City Campaign Finance Board in 2017, 26% of registered voters participated in the mayoral elections. In predominantly Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, voter turnout was as low as 8.2%. From 2008 to 2018, in a 10-year span, there was 21% of registered voters who did not vote in any elections, right? We need to figure out, how do we increase that? How do we do better? We know that there are reasons for this other than just people not wanting to come out and vote, right? With ethnic and racial majority populations in the United States rising, there is a growing number of populations, voices in our populations that remained unaccounted for in these elections. Even in 2021, right, in many places around the country, restrictions in election systems have resulted in a systematic discrimination towards minority populations, making them ineligible to vote, right? We hear about voter ID laws, not being able to locate polling sites and polling places on election day, and the need for translated voting materials, all greatly decreases voter turnout. Why does this matter? We're going to talk more about this later. It matters because history and current voting restriction and practices tells us that not all resident populations have the same history with voting, so they will participate differently. We need to figure out how to address that. So it's not just a matter of telling people that they should vote. We need to address the reasons why some individuals don't vote, give them the tools and resources so that they can do so, and remove any and all barriers and obstacles. This year, here in the city, New Yorkers will have to use ranked choice voting for the first time for the mayor, public advocate, comptroller, all those seats I talked about earlier. And on top of that, right, COVID-19 has altered voting practices and the methods of engaging voters, not to mention voters are not accustomed to early primary date in June, right? All of these changes compound the reasons why we have low voter turnout. Local elections matter, right? The local leaders you elect, the policies that they create, impact our daily lives, from schools to parks to roads to taxes. Your local leaders make these decisions that affect your life. So we must figure out ways of getting people engaged and involved and participate. With the 2020 elections fast approaching, it's fundamental that we are encouraging active participation in our democracy and lifting restrictions that prevent populations from voting. It is important that voters have a clear understanding of voting issues and changes at the local, state, and national levels, all to increase voter turnout and address the disproportionate rates of participation. These are the things we are here to discuss today. Now, I would like to introduce our phenomenal moderator for today, Patrick Lespinasse, Association for a Better New York's Young Professional Steering Committee member and Senior Advisor and Lobbyist at Brown and Weinraub. Patrick, before joining Brown and Weinraub, Patrick spent more than 10 years of his career with Verizon Communications, where he served as Director of Government and External Affairs. Before that, He served as legislative aide in the Assembly to Tom DiNapoli, and then in the office of the New York State Comptroller, assisting with various transition-related projects. He also enjoys the privilege of serving as adjunct instructor and guest speaker at many universities around the region. Patrick sits on many boards and is extremely civically active and understands the importance of active participation here on the city, state, and in the country that he loves. Patrick is someone that we are very fortunate to have moderate this discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Patrick.
Melva Miller, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to be here. Much appreciated. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Lespinasse, and it is a pleasure to be with you for this most important discussion about voter engagement and the upcoming New York City election this year, and what a year it's going to be. To guide us along in our discussion, we have 4 panelists, each of whom will have 5 to 7 minutes to make a presentation about their work within the context of the elections landscape. I will read brief biographies of each panelist, and then we'll dive right in. Allie Swatek is the Director of Policy and Research at the New York City Campaign Finance Board, where she helps New Yorkers better understand how campaigns are funded and how voters participate in our democracy. Prior to her work at the Campaign Finance Board, Allie helped improve city governance at the 2019 New York City Charter Revision Commission. Susan Lerner is the Executive Director of Common Cause New York, where she has served since December 2007. Passionate about voting rights and accessible, reliable, and secure elections, Susan is a founder of Let NY Vote, a statewide coalition that has successfully advocated to bring transformative election reforms such as early voting and automatic voter registration to New York State. Luke Hayes has over 15 years of public sector experience. Currently, he serves as campaign manager for Rank the Vote NYC. Prior to this role, Luke served as campaign manager for then candidate, now Congressman Jamal Bowen. Luke also served as campaign manager for candidate Tiffany Caban in her run for Queens DA and New York State Senator Biaggi. On the national level, Luke has managed campaigns in Virginia, Texas, and Nevada. Lurie Daniel Favors is an activist and attorney with a long-standing commitment to racial and social justice. She currently serves as interim executive director at the Center for Law and Social Justice, and prior to that was the organization's general counsel. She began her legal career in the New York offices of Proskauer Rose and Manat, Phelps and Phillips. She also served as a federal court law clerk in the chambers of the Honorable Sterling Johnson Jr. in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. Welcome, panelists. We will begin with Allie from the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Allie, the floor is yours.
Really quickly, again, I'm Allie Swatek. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Campaign Finance Board. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. 2021 is going to be the most competitive election in New York City since 2001, as Melva mentioned in her introduction. More than 400 candidates are currently running and registered with the Campaign Finance Board, including more than 35 candidates for mayor. I know that sounds incredible, but it's true. And more than 300 who are running for city council. One of the reasons why is because there's a lot of open seats, of course, which Melva also mentioned. And we project that there's actually going to be 500 candidates in the primary in general. So a lot of interest in running for office this year, which is incredible. There's also been exciting reforms to the public matching funds program, which the Campaign Finance Board is in charge of administering, election administration, which I'm sure Susan will talk about, and to the way that we vote, of course, ranked choice voting, which Luke will speak about later. Hopefully, all of this changes and all of this enthusiasm to run will also translate to more voter enthusiasm and higher voter turnout. So the first reason why this year is going to be like no other, of course, I wanted to give you the breakdown by office for those who are currently registered with the Campaign Finance Board, there are 5 offices on the ballot in 2021 and 416 total candidates. And like I said, there's over 35 people running for mayor. This is a little bit different than saying there will be 35 people on the ballot. I can't say that yet. The ballot hasn't been made, but there are 39 people registered who are interested in being on the ballot. And one of the reasons why there are so many candidates is there's a lot of open seats. So an open seat is one in which the incumbent or current office holder either can't run because they're term limited out, or is just not running because they don't want to. And open seats are more likely to encourage more candidates to run. So for example, Mayor de Blasio was elected in 2013. He is term limited to 2 4-year terms. And that means he cannot run this year, and his seat is open in 2021. That's why we're seeing 39 people who want to be the next mayor. So at the citywide level, the mayor and comptroller are open seats 4 out of 5 borough presidents. Only Queens is closed, and that's because they just elected one. And in the city council, 32 of 51 seats are open, with 4 others being decided by special election, one of which is happening literally right now. Voting is taking place in District 24. So in total, we have 38 open seats in 2021. I mentioned earlier that this year we have a really exciting expansion of the public matching funds program. For those of you who just want to be refamiliarized for what that is, for every $1 raised from a New York City resident, the Campaign Finance Board matches that with $8 in taxpayer money. So in exchange for that, candidates adhere to the spending limit, and they can now receive up to 89% of the spending limit in matching dollars, which is, again, a huge expansion of the previous program. This was the result of a 2018 Charter Revision Commission ballot question, and also some city council legislation. So the reason why our program is so great is it empowers more New Yorkers to run for office, and that in turn provides city voters with more choices at the polls. And for that reason, the Public Matching Funds Program is an incredible complement to ranked choice voting, which you'll hear more about later again. These are the numbers I was talking about to just give some context to what we're talking about, as this being the biggest election since 2001. As of today, the Campaign Finance Board has paid more than $19 million in matching funds to 2021 candidates. And just to give you an idea of how staggering that number is, that's greater than the total amount that we paid out in total in 2017 for both the primary and general elections. And we're just at the very start. The primary election doesn't take place until June. So we've only made a couple of payments. We are estimating to pay out more than $100 million by the end of 2021, which doesn't get anywhere close to the greatest amount we've paid out. I think it's about 3 times higher. Also, just to indicate how many new candidates we're seeing get into the race here. The more than $19 million we've paid out so far was paid to 66 candidates in total. Of those 66, 45 have qualified for the first time ever under the city's program. So we use this metric to indicate that the program is encouraging new crops of leaders, and we're really excited that so many first-time payers, as we call them, were able to qualify for the earliest payments of the cycle. That indicates that they're able to strongly raise money from the people they're hoping to represent, and there's a lot of interest in them running. And then lastly, to put this all into context, the CFB through our NYC Votes initiative also does outreach to underrepresented communities in New York to talk to them about voting. We do voter education around ranked choice voting. So I talk about voter turnout in elections in general quite a lot. As Melva mentioned in her intro, turnout in New York City is notoriously low overall compared to other places in the country, but especially in local election years. And I'm sure Lurie will talk about this a bit later too. We saw 23% turnout in the primary and 26% in the general the last time citywide seats were open in 2013. And then even lower turnout in 2017 when there wasn't an open mayoral seat. But I want to end on kind of like an optimistic note here. We're really hoping that the new energy around voting we've been seeing in competitive top ticket elections of the past few years will serve as a new model for greater turnout. And you can see in the 2016 presidential election, in the general, we saw 60% turnout. In the state races that we had in 2018, there was 46% turnout. And then of course, last year's presidential race saw 63% turnout. So we're hoping we can gin up some energy and enthusiasm with all of the new things that are happening and all the excitement around this election to make sure that voter turnout is higher than it has been in the past.
Allie, thank you so much for your presentation. We will go next to Susan Lerner from Common Cause New York. Susan, the floor is yours.
There have been seismic changes in the way in which New York runs its elections that have been adopted over the past 3 years by the legislature in Albany. And that's separate and apart from the entire issue of ranked choice voting here in New York City. There really has been a significant push on the part of advocates, Common Cause among them, and certainly the Center for Law and Social Justice as part of Let New York Vote, the statewide coalition that works on voter reform. And we've been focused on really what I sometimes say is dragging New York's elections into the 21st century. And I'm happy to report that we are a lot closer to the 21st century than we were when we started out. So let me talk about some of the specific reforms that have been enacted. One area that we think really facilitates voting, and the whole goal of the coalition Let New York Vote and our involvement at Common Cause New York, is to eliminate barriers to voting. It is too difficult, it has been too difficult in New York for voters to access the ballot. And so we have been concentrating over the last several years in eliminating barriers that have discouraged traditionally marginalized communities from participating and made it difficult for all voters to access the ballot as readily as we believe every American citizen should be able to do. So first, we've eliminated barriers in the area of the time to vote. We've provided more time for New Yorkers to vote. Early voting has been, I think, a tremendous reform that we saw in the 2020 election cycle, had a massive impact on how and when New Yorkers chose to vote. Approximately between 25 and 40% of voters elected to vote early in the primary and general election. This is a massive change, and we see the impact of providing New Yorkers more time to vote through the enthusiastic use which New Yorkers made of early voting. Other changes that we've been able to enact are to ensure that there are uniform polling hours throughout the state during the primary. Here in New York City, we might not be aware that until recently, upstaters were only able to vote in the primary starting at noon. And we found significant numbers of people who were disenfranchised by that barrier. That barrier has been removed. We also have worked to make an easier time to vote. I know that many of you are aware of the fact that only recently have we been able to consolidate our primaries. Previously, we had 2 separate dates for primaries, a date for the June primary, which was the federal congressional primary, and then a September primary for legislative state offices. That was confusing. It discouraged voters. Research has shown if you have a lot of different elections, voters get tired and they tend not to come out as frequently. So we've consolidated the primaries, and that was an interesting political fight, so that now all of our primaries for federal congressional office and for state and local offices are in June. And we passed a voter-friendly ballot act, improving how the ballot is actually laid out, working our way to ensure that every single ballot that a voter receives is actually readable with the naked eye. We're still working on that, but we've made progress towards it. We also had quite a battle, but we're successful in shortening the deadline for party enrollment. You may recall that prior to this past year, the deadline for changing your party or enrolling in a party was actually in the year before the primary. That kerfuffled a tremendous number of people and really ended up disenfranchising voters so that they were unable to vote in the primary. Now we've dragged that deadline at least into the same calendar year, and the deadline for changing your party enrollment is now Valentine's Day. So you can be in love with your party and change your party on February 14th. That's still further from the primary date than we would like, but at least it's in the same calendar year. So the voters have a better opportunity to actually be thinking about the primary and get in line to vote in our closed primaries. Because as you may be aware, if you're not registered in the political party, you're not going to be able to vote in that primary. And here in New York City, where so many competitive races are in the Democratic primary, if you are an unaffiliated voter, you don't get to vote in that primary. And of course, we have made it easier to vote by having the state adopt electronic poll books, which are tablets that you use to check in. So if you voted last year, you noticed that you were not signing in on the old-fashioned paper books. Instead, you were able to sign in on a tablet, which made the entire check-in process that much faster. So we've accomplished a lot in modernization and making it an easier time to vote. And we've made significant strides in modernizing our voter registration systems. Albany has passed an online voter registration program, and that should go into effect next year, which means a fully featured online voter registration capacity for our state. Right now, if you are able to access the DMV site and you are registered with the Department of Motor Vehicles, you can register online. But that's a limitation, and that's a barrier that we work to remove so that now we will have true online voter registration. And a significant advance is automatic voter registration. Now, that's not universal registration. It's not the situation where when you turn 18, you're on the voter rolls without doing anything else. We haven't gotten there yet. But what automatic voter registration does is it, again, removes barriers to registration by taking information which the state has about a voter and automatically forwarding it to the Board of Elections. And that takes place in any interaction which a potential voter has with the state agency. When the state agency gathers the information that the Board of Elections needs, that agency will automatically forward it to the Board of Elections unless the voter tells them they do not want to be registered. And we anticipate, based on experience in other states that have voter registration, have automatic voter registration, that we're likely to see as many as 1 million new voters on the registration rolls once automatic voter registration goes into effect, which will be in 2023. Just for an example, the state of Georgia adopted a form of automatic voter registration several years ago through their Department of Motor Vehicles, and they increased their voter rolls by 500,000. So we think that that is definitely going to be an advance. And because ABR is going to take place through many more state agencies than just the DMV, we think that it is definitely going to assist traditionally marginalized communities, voters who are less likely to take the necessary steps or even be aware of how to register to vote, to actually get them on the voter rolls. So better registration, better representation for marginalized communities. And we've got 2 measures which you should expect to see on the ballot this November. It requires constitutional amendment, and so we've been able to pass the necessary constitutional amendments for same-day registration and for no excuse absentee. So what does that mean? Same-day registration means that you actually can go to a polling place and be able to register on the spot and then be able to vote. So our difficulties with when the registration date is or isn't will be removed. People will not have to worry about the deadline. And what we've seen in other states is that when you combine same-day registration with early voting, you actually do get an increase in turnout. Because the truth of the matter is that most people aren't paying a lot of attention to politics, unlike some of us here on the call, on a daily basis. And they only really focus in on the election very close to either early voting or election day. And they find if they haven't been registered previously, if they've missed the deadline, then they're unable to vote. So same-day registration eliminates that problem and allows people to really go in, register to vote when they're paying most attention to the elections. And of course, no excuse absentee is a reform which we actually have had the benefit of during the 2020 registrations, during the 2020, election cycle in a fashion. Through executive order, the governor lifted the restrictions on being able to ask for an absentee so that anybody who had a fear of getting sick or making somebody else sick during the pandemic was able to request an absentee ballot. That meant that in practical terms, virtually everybody was able to obtain an absentee ballot and to be able to vote safely from the comfort of their homes and then mail in or drop off their absentee ballots at polling places. This too had a huge impact on turnout and on the number of people who voted, where we saw a tremendous increase in people who took advantage of absentee voting because of the governor's executive order. The legislature passed a temporary measure to continue the order all the way through this year, 2021. However, without the constitutional amendment, we would lose the ability to have anybody vote absentee. So that's going to be on the ballot in November, and assuming that it passes, it will click in on January 1st of 2022, and we won't have any interruption on our ability to take advantage of absentee voting and vote by mail from home. So we have, I think, accomplished a tremendous amount in modernizing our elections, both how they're conducted and how the voter accesses them. There's more to be done, but that is a presentation for another day. And thanks for having me.
Susan, thank you so much for that in-depth presentation. Up next is Luke Hayes from Rank the Vote NYC. Luke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. Just a little bit of history of why we're talking about ranked choice voting. So back in 2009, some of you might remember there was a runoff for public advocate and comptroller. And this got people thinking, what is a more cost-effective and better way to determine a nominee for a party nomination without having to do a costly runoff where turnout is even lower than some of the numbers that were cited before, and you have to keep polling locations open across the city. So in 2010, Gail Brewer, when she's city councilor, introduced the bill. It was on the Charter Commission in 2010-2018. And in 2019, it was the first question on the ballot for charter revision. I worked with Susan on the ranked choice voting campaign to vote yes on one, and it got nearly 75% of the vote in November of 2019. So here we are in 2021 for our first municipal elections using ranked choice voting. Why are we here? As many of you have seen in the past, a lot of times primaries, particularly in New York City, when there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 candidates, the winner of the primary can often win with 25, 30% of the vote, right? So about 60, 65% of the district might have voted for someone else to be the nominee, but because there were so many candidates, the winner ends up getting, moving on to the general election with 30, 25% of the vote. So the idea behind ranked choice voting is let's come up with a better way that, allows voters to get their voices heard and really make sure that a candidate who becomes the nominee gets more than 50% of the vote in their district. And what's nice about ranked choice voting, and you heard about this before with the matching funds, is it's a great way to really sync up with our great public matching fund system. Because we have a diversity of candidates running across the city from various ethnic, religious, community backgrounds without having the obstacle of money in order to run. And ranked choice voting is a great way to make sure that you don't have to decide between one or another. It allows you to rank more than one candidate. Here we are with our first ranked choice voting election. You're going to be able to rank up to 5 candidates. So I know that in the past, there have been elections I think we all would have benefited from ranked choice voting. The 2020 Democratic primary for president, there were a lot of good candidates. A lot of people like myself had more than one candidate that I liked and supported. And with, when you have a 10, 11, 12 candidates running, sometimes you want to say, well, I like her and I like him and I like him. So now with ranked choice voting, you're going to be able to express that preference, express that that order of candidates that you support, plural being the key word. So you can rank up to 5 candidates. You don't have to use all 5 rankings. You can rank 3 candidates. You can rank 2 candidates, whichever candidate or candidates really speak to you on the issues that you feel passionately about. And what we do is ranked choice voting doesn't come into play if on election day after the results come in, candidates winning with 55% of the vote. There's no need for ranked choice voting. If you get over 50% of the vote, you're going to become the nominee. You're going to win the primary election. Where it does come in is at the end of the day, if the leading candidate is at 35%, the second candidate's at 32, we're going to go into ranked choice voting. And what we do is we eliminate the lowest vote getter and allocate their second choice votes to their second preference. And I'm actually going to pause here because we're going to do a simulation that does a much more fun and engaging job on ranked choice voting. Now, before we get to that, I just want to show just a fun image. This is an image I hope all of you get used to, just to really highlight how you can rank your candidate preference. So as you can see, for those of you that have kids, remember from school, the Scantron with the little bubbles that you filled out in pencil, it's the same concept. So if you'll see here, candidate A is the person's 5th choice, candidate B is their 2nd choice, candidate C is their 1st choice, and so forth. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put a link in the chat I'm going to ask all of you to vote on your favorite pizza place in New York. This has a lot of passionate advocates out there. And a lot of people say it's hard to choose more than one. This out here. One thing I'll say is you don't have to worry about us collecting your email. You can put in a phony email address. What we want you to do is to vote on your favorite pizza place. Now in this simulation, similar to New York City, you'll be able to rank up to 5. So your 5 favorite pizza locations. And I'm going to share my screen to see the results as they come in. Now, just something I'll say to this is people have already voted on this. So I don't want you to feel like, why are there 57 votes already? People have already voted on this. We just rolled this simulation out just a few days ago. And we're going to take a look at the results and I'll break it down for you how this process works. Here is our favorite pizza place in New York. I'm going to scroll down here and you're going to get to see our preference for our favorite pizza place. Now you notice there are several rounds of voting, and this is the way we're going to be calculating the winner for our city council races, for our mayoral race, and so forth. So what we have here is I'm going to rewind this a little bit. So in round one,
I'm sorry, can you maybe just go back to the previous page and you just walk through how one chooses and then go through the results?
No problem.
Thank you.
What you're going to do is I'm going to type in my name. We're going to do Luke at abny.com. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose my favorite pizza place. So I'm going to go with, I'm a Bronxite, so I'm going to say Kingsbridge Social is my first one. Then we're going to mix it up. I'm going to go with DeFara as number 2. Then I'm going to go down to, let's go to John's Pizzeria as my 3rd choice. Grimaldi's as number 4. And then I'm going to go to Joe and Pat's as my 5th choice. So this is my ballot. My preference is Kingsbridge Social, but I have love for so many others on this ballot right here. So I'm going to look at my ranked ballot. I'm going to submit. And then we're going to go over to our results. So what we have here is on the first round, you can see John's Pizzeria was 12 people's first choice. And Barbaccino didn't get a lot of love. It only got one vote in support. So that pizza is going to get eliminated, and it looks like Barbaccino's second choice went to Totono's. So if you see here, Barbaccino, the 1 vote here, and the Totono's went from 2 votes to 3 votes. Unfortunately, that's not enough for Totono's. So we're going to go to round 3. And what we see here is Grimaldi's Pizzeria picks up a lot of second choice votes from our Totono's and Uncle Tony's Pizza, but we still don't have a majority. So we're going to go again, and Ruberosa Ristorante is going to be taken out, and their 5 votes are going to be reallocated. And as you can see, a diverse second choice among our Ruberosa. And then we're going to go to round 5, DeFara Pizza, and we see Grimaldi's and John's Pizzeria picked up a couple of second choices there. And then we're going to go Joe and Pat's is next to be eliminated. And we see actually a pretty even distribution. Everyone got a few second place votes from Joe and Pat's. And then our final round, right now we're at 19 votes for Grimaldi's, 18 for John's, and 13 for Danny's. So right now we're going to eliminate Danny's and see what those second choice votes are for Danny's Pizza. And there we go. It looks as Grimaldi's and John's got a pretty even split of the second place votes, and we get a winner with Grimaldi's Pizzeria at 24 votes and John's Pizzeria at 23. As you can imagine, this is going to impact election night. We may phase from election night parties to post-election brunches as we get these results calculated. So for those of you that are expecting results on election night, there will be a first post, and we'll see a couple of results, but we won't see a final winner declared until we go through this process like we went through right now. And that is ranked choice voting. And I'll be sure to make sure we have this link sent out to everyone. Apologies for not being able to get it through the chat. And I'm going to pass it back to Patrick.
Thank you, Luke, for your presentation. Much appreciated. We will now go to Lurie Daniel Favors. Lurie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you to all my co-panelists for setting a wonderful table. And I would just like you to think, you in the audience, if you know someone currently who's age 57 years or older, and think about who this person is to you, why they matter to you, and just keep that number in mind, 57 years or older. It may actually be you yourself. And if that is the case, then that person is actually older than integration in this country. And so when we're asking a question about how do we encourage Black voters and brown voters and traditionally excluded voters from participating in 2021, you actually have to take a step back and go back to what's been happening since 1619. And we know that for the 344 years before integration was actually embraced as a social norm in this country, the vote, with the entire access to the ballot and to the vote was intentionally withheld from each of these communities. And because the vote itself was seen as an entree route to accessing systems of power, and power holders recognize that it's very hard to run a slaveocracy or an economy based on racial distribution of access to resources and power if everyone has access to the vote. And quite frankly, racial equity is bad for slavery. It's bad for racism. And so there has been an intense effort in the 344 years before integration and in the 57 years since to literally prevent Black and brown people from accessing and doing the very thing that I'm going to be talking about right now. And we know that when Black people first got access to the right to vote with the passage of the 15th Amendment, that our registration and execution of our rights at the ballot went up into the 80 percentile range. And the backlash to that was that the Klan and white nationalist terrorist actors, similar to the ones that we saw at the Capitol just a few weeks ago, and their white supremacist sympathizers in Congress and in state legislative houses throughout the country really collaborated to suppress and oppress Black people and brown people from getting access to the ballot. And we saw this again in this most recent election. There wasn't a contestation about Georgia voters. There was questions about Black Georgia voters in Atlanta. There weren't questions about Pennsylvania voters. They were questions about Black voters in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. There were questions about voters in Michigan. There were questions about Black voters in Detroit. And so we're seeing that even though time has passed, and even though technically we are in a time where we have embraced integration as a social norm, even if it's not one in reality, that commitment to suppressing and minimizing Black access to the ballot remains one of the core functions of the democratic system as we currently, small d democratic system as we currently enjoy it. And so that's what we're up against when we say that we want to turn out the vote for these traditionally marginalized communities. And the reality is, even during the time period that we have had access to integrated social norms and have access to the ballot that was granted to us again in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we have had 57 years of intentional, multi-level integrated resistance to allowing that vote and that franchise to be expanded. And so when we're talking about turning out brown voters, what we're really asking is, how do we compensate for that 344 years of pre-integration oppression? How do we compensate for the 57 years of integrated oppression and resistance to having Black and brown communities have access to the ballot? And how do we do that when, after lies about a stolen election, we have today white supremacist sympathizing legislators across the country who are introducing measure after measure at the state level to, again, claw back the advances that Black and brown voters have been able to achieve through extensive activism. system. And one of the reasons that Black and brown voters aren't more engaged in the electoral system, in addition to everything that I just said, is because of the violence. And while our white brothers and sisters were able to not just think about what is a political club, how do you fundraise for a political club, how do you move money from one group to another group, how do you not just think about a ballot, but get an issue on the ballot, and then how do you get a person on the ballot, and once that person's on the ballot, actually corral and rally around them, and then hold them accountable effectively once they're in office. While our white brothers and sisters were able to do that and sort of flex their electoral muscles, we had to sneak out to the backwoods and to churches so that we could think about dreaming about having access to the ballot and manipulating whatever systems of power might grant us some access to that freedom. And I'm speaking quickly because I know my time is very short. So I just want to make sure I get all these points in because I think this question is vitally important. And so while other communities were able to build pipelines and deep benches of leadership to stream candidates into elected office and then get their entire community engaged in supporting that candidate and creating this symbiotic relationship between the elected official and the people who are being represented, we simply did not have that opportunity. And so that's sort of the backdrop, and that's what we have to deal with when we're talking about how we motivate Black and brown voters. And when I speak with people who are far more knowledgeable about this than I, folks like Mondale Robinson, Latasha Brown, both out of Georgia, Mondale Robinson, who led the Black Male Voter Project. And when he talks about Black male voters, who we simply often talk about as being some of the least engaged voters within the community, and there's some question about that, but for time's sake, we'll make that another nation. One of the things he talks about is that you cannot talk to a people who have been traditionally, intentionally, and explicitly excluded from the voting system about GOTV as if it's some democratic duty and think that that's going to be responsive. You have to start by talking about the issues these communities are facing and then matching up how electoral engagement addresses these issues. So when the Black Male Voter Project is gathering Black men in rooms to talk about what bothers them most about their community's condition, and if they say, you know, I'm worried about schools for my children, then the Black Male Voter Project can talk about school board elections as a way of addressing school policy. When they talk about, I'm worried about the fact that I can't walk down the street without being harassed by a white supremacist policing force, then we can talk about, well, the sheriff who helps to set policy in your community for policing is an elected position. And if not the sheriff, then the person who appoints the sheriff or your police commissioner, that is an elected position. And I'm often reminded of a conversation I had with the Black elected official who said, listen, I know that I was elected into office on the strength of my community. There's no doubt about that. But once I got into office, the people who showed up in my office with an agenda, with a long list of items they wanted me to meet, with notes about how they knew this pool of money was available and they thought that we should reallocate these funds over here to this project that they favored over there, those were not the Black voters who got them into office. It was white voters who had a tradition of being civically engaged and who understood how to manipulate those systems of power. And so when I speak with people like a Mr. Robinson, like a Latasha Brown for the Black Voter Project, what they say is that you have to take a no judgment, meet the people where they are approach and start with the issues that matter and start with meeting the people where they actually are. So if a sizable portion of the population is in the church, then of course you're going to be in the churches and in the religious houses in order to speak to the people in a comfortable space for them. And if a portion of your population is in the barbershop, then that's where you're going to set up your table and you're going to talk with them about issues, and then you will introduce the vote as one of many options to get them involved. And quite frankly, if your population is in the nightclubs, then like Black Male Voters Project, they would literally go to the nightclubs and set up a table. They incorporated the support of many of the sex workers, particularly in the Atlanta community, who put together a phenomenally powerful video. It went viral called Get Your Booty to the Polls, which was about, yes, the polls, but also the polls. And while some people poo-pooed that, the fact was we can thank their efforts for giving Georgia voters an opportunity to help save the nation and give us a chance at redemption. And so at the Center for Law and Social Justice, we're thinking about all of that history when we're thinking about how to activate Black voters, and we're recognizing that it is simply unfair and it is insufficient to talk up to Black voters in a GOTV context, because now that we have these 10 days of voting, thank you for pointing that out, Susan. We also have the reality, which is that there is an additional 355 days out of the year that Black voters should be engaged. And so what does that mean? For us, it means later this spring, we're going to be launching our Civics for the People program and campaign. Why? Because it's not just how do you vote, it's how do you build a relationship with your elected official, whether you voted for them or not, and hold them accountable effectively. How do you set up a meeting with your elected official and meet with them and not just, protest outside their office on a weekend when no one's there, but actually meet with them during business hours and not not just you yourself, but your friends, your community members, and other folks who agree with you? How do you present an agenda? How do you activate your activism in a way that is going to be empowering? And so that's how we are approaching this issue, because our history tells us that we really don't have much option. And we have to take the history of intentional voter suppression into play, and that has to factor into our plans for GOTV, because we're literally dealing with the 2021 version of that suppression today. So I know I said a lot, and I know I said it very quickly, but I wanted to make sure I was able to get those points in. So I'm happy to take additional questions and conversation. Thank you.
Lurie, thank you so much for your presentation. With the time that we have, we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. First question is regarding ranked choice voting. This is the first time we are using RCV in New York City. What other states and cities have it? And can you describe the experience of both voters and candidates? I'll send that to either Luke or Susan.
So there are a significant number and an increasing number of jurisdictions in the US that have ranked choice voting. There are, including San Francisco and California's Bay Area, that have had ranked choice 10 years. Minneapolis has transformed its city council with ranked choice voting over the last 10 years. We've got several cities in New Mexico that use ranked choice voting. And of course, now the state of Maine uses ranked choice voting for its presidential contest, its congressional contest, and to choose its governor. And Alaska has just in this past adopted a form of ranked choice voting. And there are numerous states use it for, Utah uses it for at the county level, and the Republican Party in Utah uses it. There are, I believe, 5 or 6 Democratic parties that use it statewide. Kansas and Hawaii come to mind. And then ranked choice voting has been used internationally in a number of different countries for decades. Australia, India, Ireland are among the countries that use ranked choice voting. And what we found in jurisdictions across the US is it's incredibly popular with the voters. When people are asked how they experienced ranked choice voting and whether they wanted to keep it in exit polls, the lowest numbers that I've seen are in the 80 percentiles. People are really appreciative of ranked choice voting when they have an opportunity to rank their candidates in crowded fields like the ones that Allie pointed out we're experiencing here in New York in 2021. And we've seen it transform the way in which candidates actually campaign. Repeatedly, we see a diminution in negative advertising and attacks between candidates. We see a lot more information provided to voters, and we see a lot more effective outreach from candidates to many different communities, because with ranked choice voting, a candidate can't just rely on turning out their base and ignoring everybody else in their district.
Thank you, Susan. The next question is for Allie. Are candidates having trouble fundraising given COVID and not being able to campaign much in person?
Yeah, so I can't speak that much to federal or state races that have been happening. I mean, we saw like a record-breaking spending during the presidential election in 2020. But for the local races that the CFB receives disclosures from and the candidates who we talk to on a daily basis, I know that folks who are running for office feel much, and this is understandable, feel much more uncomfortable asking folks for money during a time where, you know, folks have been losing their jobs. We have a pandemic going on. There's just not money lying around that people are willing to part with, and I think candidates feel are very aware of that. There was a Politico article a while back about how some candidates are even doing constituent services work, like providing food deliveries and mutual aid in their communities, because that's the crisis point right now that everyone's focused on. So I think that it's great that this year we saw the expansion of the public matching funds program. it means that candidates have less fundraising to do because they can rely more on the public matching funds that we pay them, and that they have to substantiate with small dollar contributions. It means that small dollar contributions can be stretched further than they were before. So again, it's great that the program was expanded this year. And just as a side note, looking towards 2021, for the folks that are contributing, I think it will be interesting to see if anybody is giving to two candidates that are in the same race because of ranked choice voting. Like, you give more money to your first choice, you give a little bit less money to your second choice, something like that. So I think, I'm really curious about that from like a research perspective, but we are very conscious of the fact that it's a challenge out there right now, especially that you can't do fundraising in person, you can't really do events in person. So we've been seeing, like we're doing right now, a lot of folks are fundraising on Zoom.
Thank you, Allie. We're running up against time, so I'm going to ask Luke to take the final two questions. Luke, the first question is, what if you only pick one candidate? Doesn't that affect the ranked choice math? That's the first question. And then the last question, because there are a lot of questions here on RCV, where can folks get more information on ranked choice voting?
Sure. So you can go to rankthevotenyc.org, or you can go to the Board of Elections or the Campaign Finance Board of New York City. So there are a few places you can go for resources online. With regards to only ranking one candidate, you can totally do that. People do that. What that presents is what we call exhausted ballots. So there is a chance that you put down one ranking, your first choice doesn't clear the threshold to move on to the second, third, or fourth round. And instead of your second choice maybe coming into play, or your third choice coming into play for another candidate that you also like, you will only have your voice heard for that one candidate. So you can do it, you can rank one candidate, but the advantage of ranking up to 5 candidates is, let's say you like candidate X because she has a great platform and education, but candidate Y, he also has a good platform and education, maybe not all that you want. If you put both of those candidates, you'll be able to ensure that if my first candidate doesn't win, my second candidate, that education issue or that transportation issue is still being talked about and advocated for. So you can rank one candidate. It doesn't affect the math as far as how we do the process. It just presents a concept that we call an exhausted ballot. And it just leaves you without an opportunity to have your voice heard and really impact subsequent rounds. So that's why we encourage people to rank candidates as many as they like, because your first choice may not win, but if you put a second or third and fourth, one of those candidates also might win. So if there's a candidate or district are all aligned on education or transportation, or take a minute to say, well, I like these 3 candidates because they have a good issue. And if you're voting for 3 candidates, you're much more likely to have one of those 3 candidates eventually win and represent your interest and your values.
Thank you, Luke. I'm going to push my luck here and ask one last question before we pass it along to Melva. And this question is for Lurie. Lurie, what can we on this call do to educate the historically disenfranchised communities about ranked choice voting?
Well, that's a great question. Support the organizations that are doing the work. A lot of times we are excited to fund candidates, and I think there's certainly a place for that, but the organizations that are on the ground are going to be the ones that make the difference. I think we have a very recent history of seeing a lot of, potentially superstar candidates who were able to fundraise all the money in the world with commercials and billboards, and they lost. And if you're not funding the people who are on the ground, you're having very beautifully theoretical conversations that can talk about the history and the all of the loveliness of it, but nothing's going to move the needle unless you're actually funding the groups that are on the ground, because those are the groups that are experts in producing the types of outcomes that you're hoping for.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to thank all of the panelists, and we will pass it along to Melva. Melva, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patrick, for running us through this very important presentation today. Wonderful job. I'd like to thank all the panelists for all of that information. It was so much. We have put links in the chat box so that if you missed any of this, you can go to the resources online, or you can go to our YouTube page and you can replay today's presentation. I know for specifically for Lurie Daniel Favors' presentation, she said a lot in a very short amount of time. So you can can you can watch her presentation again. So really quickly, call to action to everyone on the call. There are ways we can all step up and play our part, and we're asking you to do that. You can do that simply by sharing information on social media. And the Campaign Finance and Rank the Vote has great graphics and things that you can share very easily on your social media channels. And I'm sure organizations like Center for Law and Social Justice and other groups that are more grassroots will have more culturally appropriate and sensitive material that resonates with your communities online. So please share that. If we have any business owners or folks running organizations, please share this information with your staff and your employees about deadlines, when you can register to vote, especially for party affiliations, right? We know in New York City, primary elections are so important. So we want to make sure you can participate in those. So please share this information. And as Lurie said, another way that you could participate in our voter engagement efforts and in this campaign is to support the organizations that are working with the historically disenfranchised and disconnected voting residents here in New York City. So we ask you all to help us in this endeavor. It is an all hands on deck. The stakes are too high, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you all. Thank you for joining us today, and look forward to everyone coming out and voting in the June primary. Thank you.